back to Chatterfox Reviews, and as you've probably already noticed, we're changing up the format a little. So, I will be getting back into this series, but it's gonna be more than just movies that I review. See, I've been watching some of Scar the Fur's videos about the history of the fandom, and I got an idea. There's a lot of old furry comics and webcomics out there that are pretty good, so I kinda want to give my thoughts on those too. I have also heard Kit talk about all of the weird and wacky comics that he used to read when he was growing up in the fandom, and I figured I'd give them a bit of attention, since, well, I have a lot of reading time between the releases of my favorite manga. So, let's kick our return to this series off with a bang, and yeah, I kinda mean that literally, with Suicide for Hire. Now, I'll admit that the title of this comic is really, really dark on its own, but then again, so is the whole fluffing comic. It was made by Rafael Medina. I really hope I said that right. It was started back in 2004 and ran for 5 hilariously gruesome years, all the way up to late 2009. That's not that long, but it's still a good comic. Now, we'll get started with the cast since it's pretty simple. Just 2 main protagonists, though their personalities more than make up for the lack of regulars. This was intended to be a sort of buddies in crime story after all. We'll start with Hunter Ravenwood, who is a 17-year-old psychopath nearing the end of his time in high school. And I need to point out he's actually kind of my favorite character. He's mean, but he's kind of funny. Also cute. Moving along, he's easily the most carefree of the 2, and he doesn't seem to see anything morally wrong with what him and his friend are doing when they set up a literal assisted suicide business out of a fluffing treehouse. But seriously, who would start a business like this, and out of a treehouse no less? The fact that it's out of a treehouse actually ties into something in the comic that I'll be talking about a little later in the review. But, it's also worth noting that he is comically obsessed with porn and sex, but let's face it, he's a high school-aged boy. It kind of fits the bill. Oh yeah, he's a fox too, which is a pretty neat little tidbit since the comic doesn't really mention the species of either of these characters. I had to check the cast info on their site, and even there it's kind of only mentioned as an afterthought, which I kind of like personally because it makes it feel like species doesn't really matter much to the storyline. Second up is Arcturus Windrock. He has a funny name, Arcturus Windrock, a weird antisocial mouse who, at 16 years old, already smokes a fair amount and always has this sort of fluff the world attitude. And by smoking, by the way, I mean cigarettes and nothing else. I don't think he actually smokes anything else in the series. Unlike his friend Hunter, he actually doesn't like alcohol either, which is kind of a thing. He also suffers from short man syndrome, which makes for a bit of comedy in the series, since he's actually short enough that he sometimes gets mistaken for a middle schooler. He's also the more level-headed of the 2, believing that he and his buddy should be trying to talk their suicidal customers into reconsidering first before going through with their plans of escaping their troubles in gruesome ways. And I kind of agree with him there. Now, the story behind this comic is pretty dark and it's filled with a lot of messed up imagery, but underneath the shock factor it plays with so well, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. The entire plot of the story actually starts when Arcturus makes a morbid joke to shut another student up who is complaining about a guy who dumped her for cheating on him. And, I mean she did cheat on him, but making a joke about suicide, even if she's the one that brings up the idea, is still pretty messed up. But she actually takes him seriously, and when he talks to his friend Hunter about it, Hunter thinks it's a good idea and decides to start a business off of this concept. As you could have guessed, this quickly spirals out of control, with more and more people coming to them to meet their end in a comically over-the-top way, until a sudden moral conundrum causes their friendship to fracture slightly. Now, I mentioned I would be bringing this up, but something worth noting in this comic is the fact that while the police are seen on occasion, there is kind of a running gag that the two protagonists are legally untouchable for some supernatural reason. The comic even goes so far as to bring this concept up several times, both in these little offhanded remarks by the artist between the comic cells, and often enough even in the actual dialogue. Another thing to note about this entire comic is that while the suicides are grotesque, the people who these two protagonists deal with are usually given every chance to better themselves, and even have multiple opportunities to back out of the plan. It's really only due to these people's belief that they are beyond redemption, or their refusal to try and see any way to better their circumstances, that so many fatalities actually occur in this series, which really is just kind of sad. Anyways, the comic was a sort of counterculture way of addressing the thought of suicide and even poking fun at the fact that it's a horrible idea. No matter your situation, there is always a better way. You just need to be able to see it. There's also a bit in the comic that actually tackled the idea of clinical assisted suicide, where Arcturus has to face himself when an older lady who is already dying of cancer seeks out their business. Prior to her, Arcturus could actually justify everyone he'd helped kill due to them, in his words, deserving what they asked for. Now, most of the fatalities prior had been people who weren't exactly nice individuals, but to him, she didn't deserve the hand she was dealt. This part of the comic actually felt like a turning point in the story and looked to be a point where the story might take on a less satirical feel, but sadly the artist stopped making new pages rather abruptly. Now, as for my rating, I know it's going to probably come as a shock to some, but I'm giving this one 7 out of 10 paws. The gory nature of the story and the dark humor isn't really my thing, and it honestly took me out of the story sometimes, but those moments are actually few and far between, and the quirky humor that separates the dark and twisted moments, it actually kind of makes up for some of it. Beneath the dark nature of this comic is a really interesting story between two almost typical high school students. They might both be fluffing edgy as heck, but beneath it all, their friendship matters to them both a lot more than anything else, including their differing opinions on a lot of issues that get brought up in this series. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this review, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. But until next time, everybody, bye!
Oh yeah, I want to show our patrons some love too because they're awesome. Their contributions help us to afford all the neat stuff we use to record. So thank you. And if you want to become a patron too, you can click the link down in the description. You'd really be helping the channel out, and you'd get a couple nifty goodies too. Anyways, if you made it this far in the video, then yay! You're amazing. By the way, subscribe! Please don't make a foxy beg.